Welcome. Tonight we wander into the darkest corners of ancient Rome, where punishment wasn't just about pain, it was theater, spectacle, and psychological torment all rolled into one. You're standing now at the mouth of a dungeon, a stone stairway spiraling down into shadows that smell of mildew, rusted iron, and stale fear. Torches flicker weakly on damp walls, slick with condensation, and you hear the distant rattle of chains echoing like a death knell. A rat scuttles past your boot, its eyes glinting with a knowing gleam. After all, it probably dines better than many of the prisoners down here. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments where you're rewatching from and what time it is where you are. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You shuffle forward, each step sinking into slimy straw strewn across the stone floor. The rank stench of unwashed bodies and old blood clings to your nostrils. Ahead, a cell door stands ajar, its iron hinges squealing like a tortured soul as you push it open. Inside lies a collection of devices, racks with leather straps darkened by years of sweat, a crude iron collar lined with jagged teeth, and a wheel spattered with dark, crusty stains, each one a remnant of Rome's creativity and pain. Historians still argue whether these dungeons were officially sanctioned chambers or the private playgrounds of sadistic nobles. What's certain is that Rome's legal system allowed creative interpretations of punishment, especially if you offended the wrong patrician or got caught stealing from a senator's lavish table. A mainstream fact to keep you grounded in the terror. Roman law under the 12 tables set punishments that varied wildly depending on your social class. A noble might pay a fine for an offense that sent a slave to these cells for a slow, instructive death. Justice, Roman style, loved a good show. You hear whimpers drifting from deeper in the corridor, blending with the clink of chains as unseen prisoners shift. One whimper rises to a shriek as a gaunt man is dragged past you by guards wearing grim expressions carved in stone. The prisoner's legs barely hold him, his ankles bleeding where shackles bite through skin. He catches your eye, a flicker of recognition, or maybe a silent plea before he's swallowed into darkness. A fringe tidbit to savor. Some punishments were designed not for the prisoner alone, but for the crowd of gawkers and future criminals. The state needed a population more afraid of disobedience than death itself. Your fingers trace the rough grooves in the dungeon walls, grooves worn by generations of desperate hands. A moldy beam overhead once supported a pulley system used for strappado, where victims were hoisted by their wrists until shoulders popped like overcooked joints. You wince imagining the slow agony, the gradual dislocation, the ragged screams echoing off stone. Fun fact, strappado wasn't exclusive to medieval Europe. It had Roman precedents that few want to remember at dinner parties. As you explore, you stumble over a pile of rotting straw concealing a rusted bucket filled with bones chicken, goat, or a late, unlucky prisoner. The sickly sweet smell suggests you don't really want to know. Here's your first light joke to ease the tension. Don't worry, the skeleton's probably not yours. Unless you forgot to pay your taxes to the Senate. A corridor to the left leads you to a cell door adorned with a single blackened hand nailed to it, a warning for thieves. The door swings open with a gust of rancid air, revealing a ceiling so low you need to stoop. Inside, iron hooks protrude from every surface, each one a perch for fear. Some hooks dangle tattered scraps of tunics. Others glisten faintly with old, dark stains. You wonder aloud, why spend so much effort on terror? And the answer comes quickly. Rome was built on the fear of swift, spectacular punishment. Executions were public events. Tortures were whispered, legends passed from market stalls to taverns, ensuring no one doubted the price of defiance. In a moment of uncomfortable realization, you imagine yourself a petty thief caught red-handed, the heat of a Roman summer, the jeering crowd, and the magistrate's cold pronouncement as guards drag you here, where darkness is the last thing you see. You probably won't survive this. You pause beside a stone pillar stained with rusty streaks. A thick leather strap, hardened with age, is bolted at chest height, once used to secure victims while punishers got to work with whips rods or the dreaded flagrum. A multi-thonged scourge tipped with metal balls that shredded flush with every swing. Remember that crocodile dung sunscreen from last week's episode? Well, the Romans might have needed it just to keep their skin from rotting faster down here. Yet even in these pits, Roman bureaucracy thrived. Ledgers meticulously recorded who was tortured, when and why, because the empire loved paperwork nearly as much as blood. You run your hands along one last door, its wood splintered from countless panicked fists. Beyond it lies an oubliette pit so narrow and deep that prisoners were dropped in and simply forgotten. Some lasted days in the darkness, others weeks, with only the occasional bucket of stale water or crust of bread lowered down. Historians still argue whether oubliettes were widely used or reserved for Rome's most despised enemies. A final sensory wave hits you. The walls breathe cold, damp air onto your skin. The flickering torchlight dances on stone like ghosts waltzing in silence. The metallic tang of old blood coats your tongue. As you emerge back into the corridor, the chill clings to your bones. You know, you've only scratched the surface of Rome's cruel genius for punishment, and tonight, there's so much more ahead. You step back into the night air, but it's no comfort. The moon glows cold above Rome's grand temples, and the silence of the Forum feels heavy with secrets. From here, you drift to the house of the Vestal Virgins, a complex of serene gardens and marble porticos, a place of honor and dread. Tonight, you're shadowing a young Vestal who has broken her vow of chastity, and the sentence is the city's most terrifying live burial. You slip through the gate, your sandals whispering across smooth marble. The gardens are eerily perfect. Cypress trees loom tall, casting sharp-edged shadows across statues of Vesta, goddess of the hearth. But in the center lies a fresh pit lined with stone, a coffin resting beside it like an open mouth, waiting to swallow the disgraced priestess. Mainstream fact time. Vestal virgins were required to stay celibate for 30 years. Breaking this vow wasn't just a personal failing, it was seen as a dire omen for Rome itself, a cosmic betrayal that demanded a brutal correction to restore balance. The condemned Vestals led forward, her white robes spotless but her face pale and trembling. She clutches a small oil lamp, her only comfort in what awaits. You walk alongside her, feeling each step echo with inevitability. The onlookers gathered near the pit avert their eyes after all. If you watch too closely, the gods might notice your own sins. A quirky tidbit. The ceremony included providing the Vestal with a small meal bread, milk, oil placed in the coffin so the Romans could technically claim they hadn't killed her outright. They just forgot to let her back out. Neat loophole, right? The executioners move with ritual precision. The Pontifex Maximus, Rome's chief priest, raises his staff and recites words older than the city's stones. You feel a shiver crawl up your spine as the final blessings are spoken not for the woman's soul, but for the city's continued fortune. You creep closer, peering into the stone-lined pit. Its bottom is dark, silent, final. The coffin, barely wide enough for a body, looks suffocating even from here. When the Vestal descends the short ladder, you imagine the clammy air, the stale dirt smell, the oppressive silence broken only by her own breathing. She curls into the coffin as the lid lowers with a dull, resonant thud. Historians still argue whether any Vestals ever escaped punishment through powerful connections, or if every condemned priestess met this chilling fate. After all, ancient Rome wasn't always as consistent as its marble columns suggested. You stand rooted as laborers start shoveling dirt. The thump of each load onto the coffin grows louder and possibly louder, until you almost swear you hear muffled sobs below. The earth swallows the pit, smoothing it into a fresh mound as if nothing had ever happened. The crowd begins to disperse. A senator pulls his toga tighter, muttering about the bad omens caused by a faithless Vestal. Two matrons clutch each other, eyes darting as if worried they might be next. A dog barks in the distance, the only creature unbothered by Rome's ritual cruelty. Your first late joke, if you think your HOA has strict rules. Just remember Vestal's one slip-up and you're sleeping 6 feet under with complimentary milk. You wander the gardens, eyes adjusting to the shadows as marble faces watch you from every pedestal. Statues of previous Vestals stand solemn and unblinking, each one a frozen reminder of Rome's expectations. You wonder what secrets they would whisper if the stone mouths could speak. Did they envy the one just buried for escaping decades of rigid duty, or pity her endless night? A passing breeze stirs the oil lamps, their flames dancing like mocking spirits. You realize the city uses fear to bind its people. If even the purest, most sacred women weren't safe, what hope had a common thief or a rebellious slave? As you leave the courtyard, the city's silence seems deeper, the shadows longer. You recall the smell of turned earth still lingering in your nostrils and the hush that fell over the crowd as the final shovelfuls landed. Somewhere, a temple bell tolls softly, as if announcing to the gods that Rome has paid its debt for a broken vow. Remember those dungeon oubliettes? At least in them you might hear rats for company buried alive in a Vestal's tomb. You only get your own echoing heartbeat. You cross back through the forum, the marble steps cold beneath your feet, the wind carrying whispers of old sentences and lost prayers. Rome's streets glisten under moonlight, beautiful and menacing, a city always ready to consume one of its own in the name of tradition. And so you trudge on, a chill sinking deeper with each step, knowing that the next punishment makes even this living entombment look almost merciful. Because in Rome, the imagination of cruelty was boundless, and the spectacle had only just begun. You wander from the haunted stillness of the Vestal's gardens into the bustling morning streets, where rumors of last night's burials swirl like smoke through taverns and markets. But your path takes you further, beyond the city walls, to a place by the muddy banks of the Tiber. Here, a crude wooden platform creaks above the river, and a leather sack lies limp and ominous. This is the stage for poena cullei, the punishment for parricide, or killing one's own parent, a crime Romans considered the foulest of all. You approach the sack, it seems thick and reeking of old blood and river water. Nearby, 4 terrified animals, dog, rooster, monkey, and snake wait in cages, each embodying different facets of Roman symbolism. The dog's loyalty twisted to savagery, the rooster's dawn call turned omen, the monkey's mocking face, and the snake's cold betrayal. Mainstream fact, poena cullei was a punishment explicitly reserved for parent killers under Roman law, first recorded in the early Republic, but used off and on for centuries. It aimed not just to execute, but to obliterate the criminal's soul through chaos. A guard beckons you forward. The condemned man, eyes wild with terror, is forced to strip and climb into the sack. His breath quickens as the animals are shoved in after him, each beast, panicked, clawing and biting in the enclosed space. You flinch as the sack writhes violently, the man's muffled screams mixing with the squeals and snarls of his unwilling companions. Historians still argue whether all 4 animals were always included, or if local magistrates improvised with whatever creatures they had handy. Imagine the embarrassment of being sentenced to death with a goat, a goose, and a particularly cranky cat. A quirky tidbit, the sack itself was usually made of ox leather, thick enough to ensure the flailing inside didn't tear it open prematurely. Romans took pride in the craftsmanship of their execution tools, call it artisanal justice. Guards sew the sack shut with thick cord, each tug punctuating the struggle within. Once secured, the executioners haul the squirming bundle onto their shoulders. You hear one guard joke that they'd rather carry a barrel of spoiled fish. They swing the sack like a pendulum and release it into the river with a splash that echoes across the water. You lean over the edge, watching as the sack bobs once, twice, then slips below, the surface calming as if nothing had disturbed it at all. The ripples widen, glinting silver in the morning light, and then they too vanish. Your first light joke, think your childhood was rough? At least your parents never had to worry about ending up in a snake sack scenario. The gathered crowd murmurs, their eyes darting like sparrows. Some cheer, grateful that the cosmic order has been restored. Others turn away, haunted by the idea of the inescapable sack and the beasts tearing each other apart in a final, desperate dance. A boy tugs at his mother's toga, asking why the man couldn't just be hanged like everyone else. You step back from the river, heart thudding at the Romans' morbid sense of justice. Even in execution, they insisted on a story, a cautionary tale painted with horror. So children would whisper it before bed, and citizens would think twice before raising a hand against family. Remember the rattling chains of the dungeon? Compared to cullei, they seem almost gentle, don't they? The guards haul the empty cages back toward the city, muttering about the next criminal. One cage door swings open on squeaky hinges, and the monkey inside eyes you with a look of shared understanding or perhaps gleeful malice. The smell of wet fur and fear lingers as you walk away. The sun climbs higher, casting stark shadows across the Tiber's banks. The platform stands empty again, a silent promise that it will soon host another grim performance. You wonder what went through the condemned man's mind as the sack tightened around him. Regret, rage, or perhaps numb disbelief. In that final darkness, no prayers reached him. No priest offered comfort. Rome's harshest punishments spared no soul. Historians still argue about whether poena was ever used to punish women, or if female parricides were executed by other means. The records, fragmented and contradictory, leave that debate eternally open. As you retrace your steps along the river, you hear the distant clang of blacksmiths, forging more shackles, and the bark of dogs chasing each other in the streets. Blissfully unaware that their kin once shared a sack with desperate humans. The city hums with life, yet beneath it all runs an undercurrent of dread, like a hidden river promising that Rome's cruelty could rise to the surface at any moment. You find yourself glancing nervously at passing Romans, wondering who might harbor thoughts dark enough to earn them the sack. And you're certain of one thing, in this city, death wasn't always the worst fate sometimes. It was the chaos before death that made the punishment unforgettable. You leave the riverbanks, your sandals crunching on the pebbles as the city gates swallow you once more. The streets grow narrower, the shadows longer, until you reach the training yard of the gladiator schools. The clang of swords and roar of the crowd drifts from the nearby amphitheater. Here, you're not just witnessing punishment. You're witnessing punishment turned into mass entertainment. A spectacle where blood and sand mix for the thrill of tens of thousands. The gates creak open and you step onto the arena floor, the packed dirt still stained from earlier bouts. Romans called it damnatio ad bestias, condemnation to the beasts. It was a punishment for criminals, slaves, and enemies of the state, where the condemned faced wild animals in front of a roaring crowd. Sometimes they were armed with a dagger. More often, they were naked and unarmed, meant only to scream. Mainstream fact, during the late Republic and Empire, damnatio ad bestias was a staple of Roman games, with emperors like Nero and Commodus upping the stakes by importing lions, leopards, and even crocodiles from Africa to feed the crowd's appetite for exotic deaths. You see a group of prisoners being led into the arena, chained together. A few mutter prayers, others stare blankly, their minds already broken. The crowd cheers as wooden gates open, releasing a lion with a mane like a storm cloud. The beast moves low, sniffing the air, as if savoring the scent of terror. A quirky tidbit, Romans sometimes dressed the condemned in elaborate costumes, like mythological figures, to turn their deaths into gruesome plays. One condemned man might act as Orpheus, another as Marsyas, flayed alive creative, but probably not a career boost. You walk along the perimeter, dust puffing around your feet as the lion lunges. The first man tries to run, slipping in the sand, arms pinwheeling comically before claws tear into him. Blood sprays, the crowd's cheers swelling with each fresh spurt. The animal snarls, ripping flesh with almost bored efficiency. Historians still argue whether these executions were purely punishment or served a deeper political purpose, a vivid reminder of Rome's power over life and death, especially to rebellious provinces watching their own countrymen fed to beasts. A second lion emerges, and the arena erupts with anticipation. You flinch as it pounces on another prisoner, the man's scream swallowed by thousands of delighted voices. Spectators toss flowers, coins, even scraps of food, as if celebrating a winning chariot team. Your first light joke? Sure, your last performance review was awkward, but at least it didn't involve a hungry lion critiquing your every move. You duck behind a pillar as handlers prod the lions back into cages once the crowd tires of the show. Sweat drips down your neck as the bodies of the condemned are dragged away, leaving smears of red across the sand. The arena crew works with the precision of a stage crew resetting between acts, raking the dirt smooth for the next event. The smell of blood mingles with the scent of roasted meat from vendors in the stands. Romans loved multitasking their senses, after all. Gladiators emerge next, creative like rock stars, and you realize the city's moral compass has been carefully calibrated to accept death as a casual pastime. Remember that Vestal's silent tomb? At least it had the courtesy of privacy damnatio at bestias turned execution into a public holiday. As you pace the arena's edge, you catch glimpses of senators, noblewomen, and even children pointing eagerly at the carnage. Their eyes gleam, cheeks flush with excitement. In a society obsessed with conquest, the games reinforced a message. If you defied Rome, your death wouldn't just be swift, it would be humiliating, painful, and unforgettable. You hear an old man nearby mutter that the good days were gone. In his youth, they say, criminals lasted longer in the ring. Progress, apparently, had its downsides even in murder pageants. Historians still argue how much the games desensitized Romans, turning them into a people who demanded cruelty to feel alive. Or was it simply human nature, magnified by marble and ambition? As the sun sets, the last slanting rays ignite the arena's high arches with golden fire. The sand glows red like fresh wounds, the crowd begins to drift home, and the lions sleep in their cages, bellies full. You step onto the abandoned floor, your footprints the only fresh marks left after so much horror. The roar of the crowd fades into ghostly echoes, and you realize Rome was a city that celebrated punishment as an art one perfected in the arena, where the line between justice and entertainment blurred until it vanished completely. You leave the arena behind, ears still ringing with phantom cheers, and wind through Rome's labyrinth of alleys. Soon you reach the open square where wooden scaffolds tower over the cobblestone's gallows for crucifixion. It's a punishment synonymous with Rome's iron grip, reserved for slaves, rebels, and anyone daring enough to challenge imperial authority. The morning fog clings to the beams like ghostly fingers, and you can almost hear the quiet groans of countless souls who've hung here before. Executioners lean against their posts, chatting casually about the day's work. To them, each cross is just another post to fill, another body to raise. Mainstream fact, crucifixion wasn't unique to Rome, but the empire refined it into a grim spectacle. By the 1st century CE, it was common across the provinces, with mass crucifixions like the 6,000 slaves after Spartacus, revolt lining entire roads as a terrifying billboard of Roman power. You watch as prisoners are dragged from carts, wrists bound. The first victim is hoisted onto a rough beam, arms stretched wide like a grotesque welcome. The hammer's blows ring out, dull and methodical, each nail splitting wood and flesh alike. You wince, though the crowd barely reacts. It's almost routine. A quirky tidbit. Romans sometimes forced the condemned to carry the horizontal beam, the patibulum, through the streets to the execution site. A humiliating parade meant to amplify their suffering before the first nail even fell. You shuffle along the perimeter, trying not to catch the eyes of dying men as flies crawl across their faces. The air stinks of sweat, iron, and slowly decaying flesh. Time seems to stretch endlessly in this place, mirroring the agony drawn out for days on the cross. Historians still argue whether nails through the palms or wrists were standard. Some ancient sources describe ropes alone, and skeletal remains show variations. The details remain a macabre puzzle debated even today. The first light joke lands bitterly, stuck in a never-ending work meeting. At least your cross to bear isn't quite this literal. One man slips in and out of consciousness, head lolling on his chest. Another tries to push himself up with weakening legs, gasping as the full weight tears at his shoulders, a cycle repeated until exhaustion finally claims him. This prolonged torment was precisely the point, a drawn-out death that reminded every onlooker where power truly lay. Remember the bestial deaths of the arena? Crucifixion moved the cruelty from spectacular to intimate, forcing everyone to face suffering up close, often for days. Romans turned roadsides into grim galleries, each cross a cirque lesson in obedience. You pause at a cross bearing an inscription, "This man stole from his master." Simple words, yet they reveal how a petty theft could end in excruciating death if you were a slave in Rome. You imagine the man's final thoughts: regret, fury, or perhaps numb acceptance, as his world shrank to searing pain in an endless sky. A passing centurion adjusts a prisoner's ropes, ensuring he can't slip free even in death. He hums a cheerful tune, as if tending a vineyard rather than a scaffold. You step back, the scene blurring as sun beats down, heat amplifying the stink. Overhead, vultures circle lazily, the only ones excited for the afternoon's grim feast. Romans didn't invent public shaming, but they mastered it. Crucifixion wasn't just execution. It was psychological warfare for everyone who passed by. Historians still argue whether crucifixion's primary purpose was punishment or deterrence. Given the scale and ritual, it may have been both in perfect, horrifying balance. The day grows hotter, sweat stings your eyes, and the silence between hammer strikes grows longer as the condemned slip into unconsciousness. You turn away, the crunch of your sandals on gravel almost too loud, leaving behind men suspended between earth and sky, each one a dangling testament to the cost of challenging Rome's might. You flee the suffocating heat of the crucifixion ground, ducking into a shaded colonnade where marble pillars rise like silent witnesses to Rome's power. But peace proves fleeting. As you pass a bronze statue of Mars, your ears catch the low moans of chained prisoners dragged toward an iron collar fixed to a post. This is the furca, a punishment both humiliating and physically punishing, where the condemned are made to carry a forked yoke on their shoulders through the streets, every step a lesson in misery. The yoke itself, two wooden beams bound in a narrow V shape, bites into the neck. Shoulders strain, skin splits, and each stumble invites jeers and thrown refuse from onlookers. It's a mobile stockade designed to parade guilt as far as possible. Mainstream fact: furca carrying was a common punishment for runaway slaves and soldiers guilty of cowardice, and it became so feared that to bear the furca entered Roman slang as a synonym for utter disgrace. You trail one condemned man as he staggers forward, feet raw on cobbles. The yoke jerks with every step, bruising his collarbones. Children run alongside, poking him with sticks, while vendors hawk food to spectators. Never let it be said Romans missed a commercial opportunity. A quirky tidbit: some furca yokes had bells attached, so the condemned announce their approach with each miserable step, like a twisted ice cream cart warning everyone of disgrace coming down the road. The man tries to spit a curse at his tormentors, but nearly chokes. The yoke's rigid arms keep his head forced forward. His eyes, wild and red-rimmed, scan the road as if searching for any escape. The only mercy is that this punishment usually ended at a public flogging, not immediate death, though the agony could leave victims crippled for life. Historians still argue whether furca was originally a military punishment adopted by civilians or a civic invention that bled into army discipline. The earliest references suggest both possibilities. Your first late joke? Ever felt embarrassed walking into a meeting with spinach in your teeth? Imagine arriving with a giant wooden yoke and a bell jingling your shame. Remember the arena's roaring crowds? Here the mood feels meaner, more intimate people leaning from windows to mock the man's every misstep, his suffering a traveling sideshow winding past butchers and bathhouses. The procession halts at an intersection. An overseer orders the man to kneel, but the furca forces him awkwardly forward until he collapses. A soldier steps up, whipping his back with a vine staff. Each strike leaves red lines across his shoulders, blood seeping into the yoke's grain. The yoke is heavy, not just with wood, but with layers of fear. Everyone who sees it knows it could one day rest on their own neck. Rome ruled not only through violence, but through the terror of public disgrace, a fate sometimes worse than death in a society obsessed with honor. You walk alongside the shivering man as the overseer finally orders the yoke removed. His muscles twitch as it's lifted, leaving raw, swollen skin beneath. The guards toss the furca aside like spoiled meat, then haul him off for further punishment or release, depending on the mood of the magistrate. Historians still argue whether the furca's symbolism predated Roman society entirely, with some linking it to older Etruscan or Greek shame punishments, but the debate remains unsettled, much like the uneasy eyes of everyone watching the spectacle. As the crowd disperses, you glance down at the discarded yoke. It lies still in the dirt, yet seems to radiate menace, the power of Rome distilled into a simple tool of wood and iron, as effective at crushing spirits as any lion or cross. The sun breaks through clouds overhead, highlighting the grooves worn into the yoke from countless condemned shoulders. You realize Rome's genius wasn't just in engineering aqueducts or roads. It was in inventing ways to make punishment travel. A slow-moving nightmare paraded through every neighborhood as a lesson to all. You leave the furca's trail of humiliation behind, weaving through Rome's crowded markets until you reach a curious stone platform in the Forum, surrounded by pillars etched with imperial decrees. At first glance, it looks like a judge's dais, but you soon realize this is the Tarpeian Rock, a sheer cliff on the Capitoline, hill once infamous as the final stop for traitors. Corrupt officials or anyone Rome deemed too dangerous to linger on solid ground. The drop, modest by mountain standards, is lethal enough when paired with a brutal shove. Standing at the edge, you feel the breeze on your face and imagine the panic of those brought here in chains. Guards would strip them of honors, beat them with rods, then drag them up the hill as crowds gathered to watch the empire quite literally throw away its enemies. Mainstream fact, the Tarpeian Rock was named for Tarpeia, the mythical Roman maiden who betrayed the city to the Sabines. Legend says she was crushed under enemy shields atop this very hill Rome, his first cautionary tale about treason. A quirky tidbit, some sources claim condemned men occasionally survive the initial fall, only to die later of shattered bones or be finished off by executioners waiting below. Romans liked a tidy ending. You skirt the cliff's edge, toes curling as you peer down at jagged stones far below. Echoes rise up from the city vendors haggling. Children laughing life going on as if a man's fate weren't moments from ending here. Historians still argue whether the Tarpeian Rock was used consistently through the Republic or more as an occasional symbolic sentence for high-profile cases. Few records survive to prove just how often it claimed lives. Your first light joke, if you thought your last breakup was a cliffhanger, imagine one with an actual cliff involved. A prisoner appears below the hill, flanked by grim-faced lictors carrying fasces. He's dragged up the stairs step by painful step, every stumble met with a slap or kick. By the time he reaches the summit, his face is swollen and bloodied, eyes darting for mercy that won't come. Onlookers jeer from rooftops and alleys. Remember the furca's slow humiliation? The Tarpeian Rock offers a swift finale, like flipping the last page of a brutal story. A magistrate reads the charges: treason, embezzlement, conspiracy crimes against the state itself. The man's voice rises in desperate protest, but the guards pay no heed. You step aside as they hoist him to the ledge. The city's heart seems to hold its breath for one suspended moment, then a rough shove, a strangled cry, and he plummets out of sight. The thud below is sickeningly final, followed by a scattered cheer from those gathered to witness his fate. Romans believed the rock purified the city by expelling traitors. In a society that worshipped pietas duty to gods, family, and Rome betrayal deserved the most dramatic exit possible. Historians still argue whether the Tarpeian Rock use waned as crucifixion and other punishments rose in popularity, or if it remained a distinct punishment reserved for citizens of higher rank, whose deaths needed to send an unmistakable message. You look down once more at the body sprawled below, limbs twisted unnaturally. Soldiers already gather to collect it, drag it away, and erase the evidence before resuming their patrols. Life on the hilltop resumes, petitions are presented, business is transacted, as if the execution were just another routine civic duty. A senator passing nearby adjusts his toga, eyes flicking to the edge before moving on, reminded, like everyone here, that the rock is always waiting. The sky darkens with gathering clouds, thunder rumbling in the distance. The Tarpeian Rock stands silent, as it has for centuries, a cold reminder that in Rome, there was always a place to throw away those who no longer belonged. Rain begins to patter as you descend from the Tarpeian Rock, the storm rolling across Rome's rooftops like an ominous drumbeat. You duck into a covered portico for shelter, but quickly realize you thus stumbled upon yet another instrument of Rome's creative cruelty, the cullei, or sack punishment. Here, bound and terrified criminals await their turn to be sewn into leather sacks alongside a live dog, rooster, monkey, and snake, then flung into the Tiber to drown in a writhing nightmare. You watch as a magistrate reads a list of charges: parricide, the murder of one as own father or mother. In Rome, such a crime polluted the very foundation of family and state. The cullei offered not only death, but a grotesque, animal-laden spectacle to match the perceived unnaturalness of the offense. Mainstream fact: the cullei was first codified in the Lex Pompeia de Parricides, a late Republican law specifying the bizarre menagerie. It became one of the empire's most memorable punishments for parricide. A quirky tidbit: though records suggest the full animal quartet was ideal, practical issues sometimes led to substitutions. One unlucky weasel or stray cat might stand in for a monkey or snake. Historians still argue whether the ritual's purpose was symbolic, retribution forcing the parricide into the chaos of beasts, or a convenient way to eliminate someone without blood spilling in Rome's sacred spaces. Scholars puzzle over whether the animals represented dark omens or simply added to the horror. Your first light joke: think your last family reunion was awkward? At least you didn't end up sharing a sack with 4 angry animals. You step closer as slaves wrestle a screaming man toward a giant leather sack. His eyes roll wildly as he glimpses the animals hissing and snapping inside. The rooster flutters against the sack's walls, the dog growls, the monkey screeches, and the snake coils restlessly. Rain pelts the scene, slicking the cobblestones in a sheen of dread. Remember the quick finality of the Tarpeian Rock? The cullei makes death both prolonged and chaotic. a punishment that merges physical and psychological terror into one flailing, suffocating end. Guards force the man to his knees, binding his hands and feet so he can't fight back once inside. The sack's mouth yawns open like the gates of the underworld. A soldier murmurs a brief prayer to the layers, as if asking forgiveness for what's about to happen. Then the man is shoved headfirst into the sack, his screams instantly muffled by the animal's cacophony. The bag jerks and convulses as claws, teeth, and fangs meet sweaty human flesh. Several men quickly sew the opening shut with thick cords, rain-washing blood and animal filth across their hands. 2 slaves lift the sack onto a cart, trundling it through alleys to the Tiber's banks. There the sack is unceremoniously rolled into the river, where it sinks beneath dark, swirling waters. Silence returns as ripples spread outward, the city swallowing another secret. Historians still argue whether the culleus persisted as a real practice beyond the 1st century CE, or gradually became more myth than method. Some emperors favored alternative executions, even for parricides, muddying the historical record. You walk along the river's edge, the Tiber flowing gray and swollen with rain, carrying the sack and its grim cargo out to sea. To Romans, water washed away the taint of parricide. To you, it's hard to imagine a more haunting fate. The storm grows heavier, lightning flickering across distant hills. Yet even as thunder booms overhead, Rome's heartbeat continues vendors calling. Children playing, lovers huddled under porticos oblivious to the sack now drifting somewhere downstream. A brutal reminder of what happened when blood ties were severed by betrayal. The rain begins to ease as you follow the winding Tiber upstream, your shoes slapping softly on the slick stones. Soon you find yourself at the edge of a dim courtyard, where a group of magistrates and soldiers are gathered around a particular grim contraption, the poena cullei's distant cousin, the scourging post. Unlike the sack, this punishment isn't about spectacle, but relentless pain inflicted publicly on offenders like debtors, petty criminals, or disgraced soldiers. The post is a sturdy wooden pillar, polished smooth but cruelly unforgiving. A man is lashed to it, wrists and ankles tightly bound, bare back exposed to the cold morning air. The crowd circles, waiting for the lash to begin. You can almost feel the anticipation, that cruel mix of justice and sadism that keeps Rome's gears grinding. Mainstream fact: scourging was a common preliminary punishment before execution, used to extract confessions or humiliate the accused. In some cases, it was itself the sentence, especially for slaves or low-status offenders. A quirky tidbit: some Roman scourges had leather thongs embedded with metal or bone fragments to increase damage, making each strike a mix of whipping and flaying. Historians still argue whether scourging was more often a deterrent or a means of torture for extracting truth, as some sources praise its efficiency, while others condemn the cruelty and unreliability it bred. Your first light joke: ever felt like your back has been through a ringer after a bad night? Well, imagine a ringer made of metal spikes. The man tied to the post strains against his bonds as the first lash swings down, the crack sharp enough to echo across the square. He grits his teeth, eyes watering, but makes no sound. Each strike flakes skin and draws fresh blood, the crowd's murmurs rising and falling like a tide. Remember the culleus as chaotic suffocation, or the furca as slow humiliation? Here the pain is raw and rhythmic, a brutal drumbeat of suffering. The flogging continues until the man's body is a crimson tapestry of welts and wounds. Spectators whisper rumors of infamous scourges used in gladiator schools, where trainees were whipped into shape or to death. The post's location near the baths seems ironic. After pain comes cleansing, but few would find that solace here. The magistrate overseeing the punishment occasionally nods, satisfied or disappointed by the prisoner's endurance. Sometimes mercy arrives in the form of death. Other times, the condemned must survive to face a harsher sentence. Historians still argue about the frequency of scourging for Roman citizens versus slaves, as legal texts distinguish harshly between classes, complicating our understanding of how widespread this punishment really was. You watch the man slump as the final lashes fall, his breath ragged, skin torn. The crowd disperses quickly, perhaps eager to forget what they've witnessed, or simply moving on to their next distraction, trading gossip, haggling for fresh fish, or planning dinner. You step away from the posts, the scent of sweat, blood, and leather lingering in the air. Scourging may lack the spectacle of crucifixion or the horror of the sack, but its brutal efficiency leaves a mark not only on bodies but on Rome's collective conscience. You recall the bell-jangling furca, the merciless Tarpeian rock, and the animal-filled sack, realizing that every punishment served a distinct purpose: humiliation, terror, or pain, each a note in Rome's deadly symphony. The sun breaks through the clouds, casting shafts of light on the battered back. The man is carried away, likely to face his next ordeal, or to be discarded like so many others. The post stands empty now, but its story echoes through the city's streets, a reminder of what awaited those who stepped out of line. You wander past the busy forum, the chatter of merchants and citizens blending with the distant clang of the smithy's hammer. Near the edge of the bustling square, you notice a small crowd gathered around a peculiar sight: a man shackled and forced to wear a cucullus. Humiliatorius, a humiliating hood, designed not just to punish, but to erase dignity entirely. His face is concealed beneath a tight-fitting leather hood, pierced only by tiny holes to breathe and see if only barely. This isn't your usual corporal punishment. It's psychological, an isolation within a crowd, a silencing that strips identity and replaces it with shame. The hooded man stumbles, disoriented, unable to meet anyone's gaze, an unwilling performer in a public spectacle of disgrace. Mainstream fact: the cucullus humiliatorius was typically used for slaves and lower-class offenders, often those guilty of theft or insubordination, serving as a form of public humiliation and control. A quirky tidbit: some sources suggest that hoods like these were sometimes scented with foul substances or peppered with irritants, turning the punishment into a sensory assault as well as a visual one. Historians still argue whether the hood was ever used beyond informal or ad hoc punishments, as few official legal records describe it, yet its terrifying psychological effect was likely well known across the empire. Your first light joke: ever worn a hoodie so tight it felt like a personal space invasion? Imagine one you can't pull off for hours, with people staring at you like you're a Halloween decoration. You follow the hooded man as he's paraded through the streets, stumbling past curious onlookers. His breath hitches inside the confined space, each step an ordeal. Merchants pause their haggling. Children poke at his robes, giggling at the strange figure who can't answer back. Remember the man in the sack with his menagerie of animals? This punishment offers a different kind of captivity, one that cages the mind by trapping the senses. While the sack drowned the body in chaos, the hood drowns the spirit in silence and confusion. The crowd's jeers feel louder because the man cannot see who is mocking him. Faces blur through the tiny holes, voices distort, and time slows. You can almost hear the pounding of his heartbeat as the hood tightens psychologically with every glance and whisper. Occasionally, a passerby throws a handful of dust or straw into the hood, eliciting muffled coughs. The slaves escorting him ignore the taunts, their own expressions grim victims of the same system that punishes. Historians still debate whether the cucullus humiliatorius was reserved solely for slaves or whether poorer citizens also endured it, reflecting Rome's rigid social hierarchy and punishment methods. The hooded man is led to the city's outskirts, where his punishment concludes with public stripping or branding. Further marks of shame intended to haunt him long after the hood is removed. You imagine the relief when the hood finally comes off, eyes blinking against sunlight, lungs gasping fresh air, but the scars of humiliation burning deeper than any wound. The sun dips low, casting long shadows on the pavement, the city slowly settling into evening. Rome's punishments are many and varied, each crafted to remind citizens exactly who holds the power. You take a deep breath and step away from the crowd. The hood lies discarded, a symbol of unseen suffering in a city built on spectacle and control. You cross a narrow street filled with the smell of roasting meats and warm bread, moving toward a quiet corner of Rome where a strange form of punishment unfolds. The poena cullei is less famous cousin, the punishment of the sack without animals, reserved for less severe but still grave offenses like false testimony or political betrayal. Unlike the dramatic culleus you saw before, this version focuses on silent suffocation, isolating the condemned in a leather bag with no company but their own rising panic. This punishment relies on a terrifying psychological element, forcing the criminal into utter darkness and hopelessness, stripped of senses beyond the faint rustle of the sack's leather skin. Mainstream fact: the practice of imprisoning someone in a sack and drowning them is a documented Roman capital punishment, though the exact contents and ritual varied over time. A quirky tidbit: some variations included adding sharp objects or weights inside the sack to hasten death, turning the victim's final moments into a brutal, claustrophobic ordeal. Historians still argue whether the addition of animals to the sack was symbolic or practical, and how frequently the simpler sack-only version was actually used versus the more elaborate, animal-filled execution. Your first light joke: ever felt like you needed to escape a tight spot? Try being trapped in a bag that makes a clown suitcase look roomy. You watch as officials wrestle a trembling man into the sack, the leather sticky with moisture from the river nearby. His muffled protests are cut off as the bag is sealed tightly, leaving only a faint, desperate sound leaking out. Unlike the cacophony of the animal-filled culleus, this punishment is an eerie silence. No roosters crow, no dogs growl, just the slow ebb of breath and rising panic within a sealed tomb. You recall the furca's slow parade, the Tarpeian Rock's final shove, and the hood's psychological torment. This sack offers a terrifying middle ground bodily punishment, married with suffocating isolation. The sack is then weighted down and cast into the river, disappearing beneath murky waters that swallow sound and light. The Tiber flows on, indifferent to the lives it claims. Historians still argue how much ritual accompanied the sack's use, whether prayers or curses were spoken to mark the passage from life to death, or if it was treated as a mere disposal of dangerous individuals. You think about the condemned man's last moments, trapped in pitch black, no sight or sound save his own breath terrifying in its simplicity. His fate contrasts with the noisy spectacle of Rome's other punishments, highlighting a grim efficiency. The city's noises return as the sack sinks, blending into the background buzz of daily life: vendors calling, children playing, senators debating. Death is routine, but its methods endlessly varied. You shake off the chill creeping up your spine and move on, the leather sack sinking deeper into the river's current, a silent end lost beneath Rome's relentless flow. You follow a narrow, shadowed alley away from the river's edge, the cobblestones slick and worn by countless feet. Here, a different kind of cruelty unfolds, the crucifixion of slaves and rebels, a punishment both excruciating and symbolic. While you've heard the stories before, the reality hits differently, standing beneath the towering cross, smelling the resin, and feeling the rough wood biting into your palms, as if you might soon share the victim's fate. Crucifixion wasn't just about death, it was a public performance of power, humiliation, and slow agony, designed to break body and spirit under the hot Roman sun. Mainstream fact: crucifixion was a standard punishment for non-citizens, slaves, and those accused of sedition, especially after large rebellions like the Spartacus Revolt. A quirky tidbit: some crucifixion victims were given a small seat or footrest, called a settle, to prolong suffering by allowing limited support and ironic comfort that only delayed death. Historians still argue about the exact method of crucifixion, how nails were placed, how long victims survived, and what physiological processes caused death, since no autopsy from the period survives. Your first light joke: if you think standing in line forever is torture, try being nailed to a wooden plank with no bathroom breaks. You watch as a man is dragged to the cross, his body raw, muscles trembling from exhaustion and pain. Soldiers hammer nails through wrists and feet with clinical precision. The cross is raised, the victim's weight pulling on wounds, lungs struggling for air. Spectators walk by, some with sympathy, others with callous indifference. Remember the earlier punishments, the sack, the furca, the hood, and notice how crucifixion combines them all: physical torment, public humiliation, and psychological despair. You recall tales of criminals left hanging for days, birds pecking at flesh, until nothing remains but bones and sorrow. The stench of decay and sweat blends with the Roman midday heat. Historians still argue whether victims were offered any mercy, like broken legs to hasten death, or if some were intentionally left to linger as a warning to others. The crowds move on, the spectacle fading, but the memory of suffering etched into the city's soul. The cross stands as a stark reminder of Rome's grip on justice and cruelty. You step away, the shadow of the cross stretching long behind you as the sun dips lower. Tomorrow, more punishments will unfold. Tonight, you carry their weight with you, a silent witness to history's harshest lessons. The sun is setting low, casting a warm blood-red glow over the city's rooftops as you find yourself near the infamous Colosseum, where a unique form of punishment blends public entertainment with terror: damnatio ad bestias, condemnation to beasts. Here, criminals, prisoners of war, and rebels face death not from men but from savage animals, creating a spectacle of horror meant to entertain the Roman masses. You watch as a condemned man, bound and trembling, is thrust into the arena's sandy pit. The roar of the crowd echoes off the towering stone walls, and the scent of dust and sweat fills the air. Soon, ferocious lions and bears are released, their snarls mixing with human screams in a chaotic chorus of violence. Mainstream fact: damnatio ad bestias was a legally sanctioned execution, especially for Christians and enemies of the state, often held during gladiatorial games to heighten drama and public thrill. A quirky tidbit: some Romans believed that animals could sense guilt or innocence, refusing to attack worthy victims, though this was likely a myth fostered by clever trainers and showmen. Historians still argue about the precise number of executions held at the Colosseum, and whether some were staged or exaggerated for political purposes. Your first late joke: ever feel like your boss's meetings are savage? At least they don't involve lions chasing you around the sandy pit. The condemned man stumbles, trying to evade the advancing beasts, but exhaustion and fear slow him down. The crowd's cheers rise and fall like waves, some shouting encouragement, others jeering. You can almost taste the tension and adrenaline hanging thick in the arena's heated air. Remember the earlier punishments, the silent sack, the public scourging, the crucifixion, and realize how damnatio ad bestias amplifies both spectacle and cruelty, turning death into a gladiatorial show. You see the beasts close in, their heavy paws churning the sand, their eyes locked on the terrified man. The crowd holds its breath, caught between fascination and horror. Historians still debate whether some condemned were spared through intervention or bribery, or if survival was ever an option, perhaps for gladiators turned beast victims as part of their training. As the sun sets completely, the arena fills with shadows and the last echoes of the crowd's roars. You step back, heart pounding, the image of man and beast locked in mortal combat lingering in your mind. Tonight, Rome's dark pageantry continues, reminding you of a world where justice was as much a performance as a punishment. The night deepens, and you find yourself wandering toward the Roman Senate's shadowed outskirts, where a punishment less about pain and more about social annihilation unfolds. damnatio memoriae, or condemnation of memory. This is a sentence not of flesh, but of erasure, where the state attempts to wipe a person from history, destroying statues, removing names from records, and ordering friends and family to sever all ties. You imagine walking through Rome's streets and suddenly realizing that a once famous figure's face has been chiseled off every statue, their names scrubbed from public inscriptions. It is a punishment so intangible yet so profound that it haunts not just the condemned, but the collective memory of the city. Mainstream fact: damnatio memoriae was often reserved for disgraced emperors, traitors, or those who fell from political favor, like Emperor Domitian or Geta, whose images and names were systematically erased. A quirky tidbit: sometimes the erasure backfired, turning the condemned into a sort of dark celebrity, as whispers and rumors flourished precisely because the state tried to silence them. Historians still argue how effective damnatio memoriae truly was, since many erased figures survive in unofficial accounts or graffiti, leaving traces despite official attempts to obliterate their legacy. Your first light joke: ever wished you could delete that embarrassing photo from the internet? Imagine if an entire empire tried to do that to you. Walking past a ruined statue with a decapitated head and chipped inscription, you feel the eerie absence, the silence where a presence once stood. You realize that, in Rome, to be forgotten was sometimes worse than death itself. The Senate decrees damnatio memoriae quietly but ruthlessly, commanding the destruction of coins, documents, and even private letters. Friends and allies might face suspicion or punishment simply for remembering or speaking the condemned's name. Remember the far more physical punishments, the scourging, the sack, the beasts, and how this is punishment for the soul, aimed at identity and legacy rather than flesh. You consider how the citizens cope, caught between reverence for the past and fear of political purge, uncertain whether those erased were truly guilty or simply victims of power struggles. Historians still debate whether damnatio memoriae was a sincere effort to erase or a political tool used more for intimidation and propaganda than actual oblivion. You imagine the condemned's family forced to live in quiet shame or flee the city, their heritage dismantled piece by piece. The shadows lengthen, and you walk away from the broken statue, the chilling silence following you like a ghost. Rome's punishments, you realize, are as much about control of minds and memories as control of bodies, a legacy of fear etched in stone and silence. The city's sounds grow distant as you near the outskirts, where the most unusual and rare form of punishment unfolds, the poena cullei, the punishment of the sack. You already know the basics: a convicted parricide stuffed into a leather sack with a mix of live animals and then drowned in the river. But standing here, imagining the cramped darkness, the wild chaos inside the sack, makes it all feel disturbingly vivid. The condemned is thrown in alongside a monkey, a snake, a rooster, and a dog, an odd menagerie meant to symbolize the unnatural act of killing a parent. The man's desperate struggle mingles with the panicked movements of the animals, all trapped together in this underwater coffin. Mainstream fact: the poena cullei was an extreme, legally codified punishment reserved solely for parricides, those who killed a parent or close relative, reflecting the Romans' profound reverence for family and social order. A quirky tidbit: some ancient sources claim the animals chosen for the sack were symbolic, the snake representing treachery, the monkey foolishness, the dog loyalty turned savage, and the rooster the break of dawn signaling inevitable judgment. Historians still argue over the exact combination of animals used and whether the condemned ever survived long enough for their torment to become a drawn-out spectacle, or if death was almost instantaneous. Your first light joke: ever tried sharing a crowded elevator with animals that don't know you? Imagine being stuck in a sack with a snake and a monkey awkward doesn't he begin to cover it. You watch as the sack is sewn tightly and lowered into the Tiber's cold, dark waters. The city's hum fades, replaced by the muffled sound of struggling limbs and frantic animal noises. Time dilates, and you feel the claustrophobic terror radiating through the sack's thick leather. You recall the earlier punishments, the slow torment of crucifixion, the psychological agony of the hood, the brutal spectacle of the arena, all culminating here in this ultimate act of confinement and symbolic horror. The sack sinks beneath the surface, the water swallowing all signs of life, leaving only ripples that fade in the moonlight. You step back, shivering despite the warm night air, the weight of ancient Rome's justice settling heavily around you. As you settle down to rest after this long journey through the cruel and bizarre punishments of ancient Rome, let your mind soften and the images fade gently into shadows. Remember, these stories are echoes of a world so different, yet connected to ours by the universal themes of justice, power, and humanity's darker impulses. You've witnessed the extremes of control, pain, and humiliation, each punishment a reflection of a society trying to enforce order through fear. Now, let your breathing slow, your body relax, and your thoughts drift like leaves on a quiet river. Imagine the Tiber flowing calmly, carrying away the weight of those ancient horrors, leaving you in peace. The city quiets, the stars emerge, and the cool night air wraps around you like a soft, protective blanket. Thank you for sharing this journey with me. May your dreams be gentle, filled with calm and comfort. Rest easy, knowing that you have survived the night's stories far better than any ancient Roman ever could. End of script. Sweet dreams.